Moscow is in terror. The energy collapse has already begun. Flamingos and iron birds have pierced the heart of the empire. Air defenses are powerless, the Kremlin is in hysteria, and the elite are panicking. A winter without heat is coming. Moscow is freezing, Russians are holding their heads in despair. The empire is collapsing from within, generals are being dismissed one after another, and Gerasimov is hanging by a thread. Putin is in a panic. The Kremlin is bursting at the seams, and the elite are saving their own skins. The end is near. Moscow is burning, the economy is collapsing, the empire is heading for... The abyss collapse is inevitable. All the details coming up. Ukraine Today with Renata Aslanova welcomes you and brings you the latest events. Moscow is on the brink of survival. A city of millions could be plunged into darkness and cold. Ukrainian defenders are hitting their targets with precision. The energy facilities of the Russian capital are bursting at the seams. The line on which Moscow depends is ablaze once again. Ukrainian iron birds struck the Vladimirskaya substation. Russia's capital is being engulfed by an energy nightmare. He's there, lying completely still, not making a single movement. Is he dead? Can you tell if he's actually dead? Yes, he's dead now. There's no doubt about it. He's definitely dead now. Dead now? I can't believe it, but it really seems like he's gone. No, officially confirmed. The governor of the Vladimir region, Alexander Avdeyev, acknowledged the strike on the energy facility.
The energy infrastructure in the suburbs of Vladimir was attacked by drones. Specialists are working at the site. With the arrival of daylight, the elimination of the consequences will begin. Please remain calm. All vital systems are operating normally.
Ukraine is aiming at the heart of the empire. The defense forces are step-by-step cutting Moscow off from its power sources. This was stated by military analyst Denis Popovich.
As for Vladimir, yes, work is underway to cut Moscow off from the capacities of the Volga hydroelectric cascade. And Moscow was very seriously supplied with energy through several lines. This is still a Soviet-era scheme. The capital was supposed to be supplied with electricity from several sources. Now Moscow is being cut off from these sources. And then we'll see when the lights go out in Moscow as well.
This is sensational. Moscow is under fire. A Ukrainian Flamingo missile has broken into the capital. Russians are whispering about a complete rout, and the footage that has surfaced online speaks for itself. Russians are panicking and shouting about an attack. Ukraine remains icy calm. So far, there are neither confirmations nor denials. As Militani writes, the version of Ukrainian ballistic missiles cannot be ruled out. Some of the footage clearly indicates the flight of cruise missiles. Not just Flamingos alone, drones are finishing off Moscow. A mega attack on the heart of Russia has paralyzed the Kremlin. Devastating strikes have brought down the great empire. Air defenses are powerless, and Ukrainian vengeance has hit its mark. Hell has crept right up to Moscow. Could the final blow be coming?
Pickups with machine guns mounted on their roofs are stationed around the Kremlin perimeter. It's unlikely that Putin and his generals expected to see such a scene in the fourth year of the war. This past weekend, Moscow and the surrounding region came under a massive drone attack. At night, Domodedovo and Zhukovsky airports were temporarily closed. By morning, their operations had been restored. In the Kommunarka area, explosions were heard during the attack and smoke was seen rising above the forest. All night, Moscow Mayor Sobyanin was posting on his Telegram channel about drones being shot down. Other Russian public channels also reported on the large-scale drone attack. In this,
Ukrainian armed forces are trying to launch a massive attack on Moscow and the region. Within a couple of hours, 14 drones heading for the capital were destroyed. Explosions in the sky were heard in Domodedovo, Podolsk, Dubna, Ramenskoye, Kommunarka, Troitsk, and Kolomna. At Zhukovsky and Domodedovo airports, 5 flights were cancelled and 6 were rescheduled. Restrictions on departures and arrivals have been imposed. In
the Moscow region, a massive fire broke out at the Serpukhov oil depot as a result of drone strikes. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported that nearly 200 attack UAVs were shot down overnight.
This is not the first time that Russians themselves have recorded more than 40 drones heading toward Moscow. We're actually trying to bypass the capital's air defense system, which is now deployed directly there. But we understand that all of this is a series of specific retaliatory strikes and probing actions, probing to see how a more effective combined strike can be delivered.
Recently, Western media published a map of the air defense systems protecting the capital of the Russian Federation. But even through such dense protection, Ukrainian drones managed to slip through. Because of this heavy defense of Moscow, other regions and strategic facilities across Russia are suffering.
Analysts note that the systems are constantly being moved around, but the majority are concentrated around Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Putin's residence in Valdai. There simply aren't enough systems to protect oil refineries and other strategic sites in the regions. The Ukrainian armed forces are taking advantage of this. In
the Moscow region, explosions were heard near the airfield where Russia's strategic aviation is based. The Shaikovka strategic aviation base and the airport were also under attack. Kaluga, in Russia's Kaluga region. This is not the first massive drone attack on Moscow and other regions, even though the Russian Ministry of Defense always underreports the number of drones. Almost 200. That's quite a lot, and the number will only continue to grow.
This has a very serious anti-propaganda effect directly for the Kremlin. Let me remind you that one of the reasons for launching the so-called special military operation was the issue of guaranteeing the security of the Russian Federation itself. As Putin and his inner circle explained it, we now see how the war is coming directly to Moscow. And not just to Muscovites. We see that the geography of Ukraine's drone attacks is expanding.
Before the start of the so-called special military operation, drones didn't terrorize ordinary Russians, let alone Muscovites. Now, however, air raid alerts all night long have become a routine occurrence for Moscow, and perhaps now Russians will have questions and complaints for the Kremlin's master.
Russia is in blackout. Ukraine's energy war is gaining momentum. Ukrainian drones and missiles are finishing off thermal power plants, depriving Russians of light and heat. What awaits Russia in winter if the dictator doesn't come to his senses? Details coming up in the report.
On the eve of winter and the heating season, Russia, as usual, strikes at Ukraine's energy infrastructure. And now, for the first time in the 3.5 years of war, Kyiv is not only threatening retaliatory strikes, but actually carrying them out.
If they threaten a blackout in Ukraine's capital, then the Kremlin should know there will be a blackout in Russia's capital as well.
Any action by Russia aimed at harming Ukraine will be met with a symmetrical response. This also applies to the energy sector.
The president was absolutely right in what he said. We will find both the means and the weapons, and we will carry out these operations. They will definitely realize that this way they will not gain any advantage. Any action by Russia will definitely be countered. Andriy Inatov, Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
Blackouts in Russian regions and even in Moscow are quite possible. And there are several reasons for this. One of them, of course, is strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces on the power system. And the second is the sanctions that are already in effect, and accordingly, the inability to purchase spare parts and equipment. And the existing equipment is degrading and becoming unusable.
Russia's energy sector today is a powder keg. The power deficit has reached 25 gigawatts. This is not an isolated failure, but a systemic collapse. And this is even before any systematic strikes which Russia itself is bringing closer by its actions against our energy sector. Instead of investing in its own thermal and hydroelectric power plants, Moscow is losing reserves due to sanctions and aging equipment. Andrei Kovalenko, head of the Center for Policy Studies.
If Ukraine starts systematically striking thermal and power plants across all regions of the Russian Federation, as happened in the Belgorod region on the night from Sunday to Monday, it will be extremely difficult to restore Russia's energy sector. Currently, 42 regions of the Russian Federation are already introducing consumption restrictions during peak hours in the center of the country. In Siberia and the Far East, there is an energy shortage everywhere. And that's even without any capacities being knocked out. When Russians destroy Ukraine's energy infrastructure, we have a safety net. We receive kilowatts from the EU as well as spare parts for repairs. In turn, Russia does not have such support. Their energy workers can only rely on themselves. And as the latest strike in the south showed, Russia is facing a very long, cold, and dark winter.
But it's not that simple. Drones and missiles over Rubliovka. The true purpose of the strike in Ukraine on Moscow has been revealed. With their recent attacks, Ukraine's defense forces are trying to probe the air defense system of Russia's capital. This was stated by sociologist and publicist Igor Eidman. The publicist suggests that even more massive, significantly more effective and destructive attacks from Ukraine are ahead.
Such attacks would be a powerful psychological blow. both to the elite and to Putin's authority. After all, formally, Putin is the guarantor of the constitution, but in reality, he is the guarantor of a good life for Russia's ruling elite. That's why they keep him, tolerating his reckless actions on the world stage, including the criminal aggression against Ukraine.
Muscovites are becoming a factor, putting pressure on the Kremlin. The provinces are ignored, but explosions outside the elite's windows make Putin nervous. Everything is falling apart. Even the propagandists can't take it anymore. War correspondent Filatov is shouting about senseless meat grinder assaults. Columns are burning, the losses are monstrous, and there are zero results.
The most recent and up-to-date videos that are attached to these ongoing mechanized assaults, those who know there's no success at all. They lost people, lost equipment, and as for results, well, I don't know what's being officially reported, but in reality there are no results.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Even on Russian TV, you can hear notes of panic. Experts are openly talking about the failure of the special military operation.
It seems to me that everything is heading toward Russia, probably agreeing to what they call a deal. A deal always involves compromises. And compromises mean stepping back from the goals and intentions that were previously declared. It looks like we're in for... We apparently had to sacrifice some of our goals. Why? Because Konstantin Vladimirovich was right when he said that 3.5 years have already passed. He's right. It was revealed, honestly. We were already in Berlin about 4 years later.
Gerasimov, in a panic, fires generals to save himself. Putin is furious. The lies have been exposed. The front is collapsing.
Gerasimov is in a panic, looking for someone to blame for the failures and his own lies to Putin, about how they supposedly defeated everyone, captured everything, and surrounded everyone.
According to blogger journalist Zolkin, heads have already started to roll. At the very least, the chief of the Russian general staff has fired 2 generals.
Will Gerasimov himself be dismissed? That remains unknown for now. In a way, this liar even works to our advantage.
The truth is truly shocking. Gerasimov is hanging by a thread. They've already found a replacement for him in Moscow. Putin is in a panic and swinging between extremes. The military leadership is collapsing like a house of cards. There is chaos and mutual betrayal in the dictator's inner circle. The situation is reaching a boiling point. Will there be anyone left to give orders? All the details are coming up in the next segment.
The last leg of Valery Gerasimov's chair has broken. There is great dissatisfaction in the Kremlin with the general's work and, to put it mildly, his less than truthful reports from the front. This is reported by the Atesh movement, citing information from officers of one of the Russian military groups.
Putin gave Gerasimov a deadline to capture Pokrovsk by mid-November. This order is the general's last chance to keep his position. Against the backdrop of this ultimatum, there has been a sharp increase in human wave assaults in the Pokrovsk direction. The command is sending massive waves of personnel into suicidal attacks in order to fulfill the order at any cost.
Valery Gerasimov, an unremarkable man without charisma, is the person to whom Putin owes his first presidential term. It was he who, while Moscow was preparing to check boxes on ballots, led the combat operations for the village of Komsomolskoye. This 15-day-long battle became the key and final one in the Russian second Chechen campaign. Gerasimov delivered victory to candidate Putin, marching over the numerous corpses of Russian soldiers and local residents.
The residents were allowed to leave the village, but they were not allowed to go far. They were forced to stay outside for several days, unable to go indoors. On the outskirts of the village, but in reality they were being used as a human shield. In
2012, it was Gerasimov who presented the country's leadership with the formula for hybrid warfare. At that time, he insisted that it was necessary to move away from classical wars toward destabilization on the ground.
Its method lies in the careful and active use of the protest potential of the fifth column.
A little later, the Gerasimov formula was tested by the Russians first in Crimea and then in Donbass. According to Bellingcat investigators, it was Valery Gerasimov who, in 2014, initiated the deployment of regular Russian troops near Ukrainian Ilovaisk and the transfer of Russian military equipment to the separatists, from which, by the way, the Malaysian Boeing was shot down. Mute Gerasim, as the Grey Cardinal of the General Staff is called among themselves, has outlasted all his loud and flamboyant critics.
They'll be eating ammunition in hell, slowly and painfully stuffing it all down their throats, bite after bite, unable to escape their fate. We're currently short on ammunition by approximately 70%, which is a significant shortage. Shoigu, Gerasimov, where exactly is the ammunition? We urgently need a response.
Prigozhin has been blown up. Strelkov-Gherkin is rotting behind bars. After the scandal, it was thanks to Valery Gerasimov's efforts that the favorite of Russian Zed supporters, General Popov, was sent there. Even Shoigu was removed from the Ministry of Defense, but mute Gerasimov still remains in his chair. Although rumors of his dismissal have been actively spreading since last summer, and now supposedly there are actually real grounds for them. If Gerasimov fails to capture Pokrovsk by mid-November, he will be replaced by Viktor Viktorovich Paznikir, who was born and raised not far from the Ukrainian city of Sumy. Not much is known about him. He was awarded the Order of Zhukov by a classified decree, and in February 2024, he received the rank of Colonel General.
It's hard to call this military leader a media figure. His name was first mentioned in the media after the start of the operation in Syria. The Lieutenant General held the position of First Deputy Chief of the Main Operational Directorate of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces. His briefings were dedicated to the situation around Palmyra and Aleppo. Paznikir also spoke about the work of the Russian military police in the Middle East and criticized the presence of American naval forces in the region. The Lieutenant General's statement about US plans to develop a global missile defense system caused a major stir. At the Moscow Conference on International Security, Paznikir called Washington a likely adversary of Moscow. To overcome missile defense systems, Viktor Viktorovich proposed using the Sarmat and Avangard complexes.
It is still unknown whether Gerasimov will be able to outsmart his adversaries again and hold his position. Since the summer, the occupiers have been amassing troops in the Pokrovsk direction and probing for weak spots in the Ukrainian defense. On their side are Russia's vast resources, which are spared no expense to achieve their goals, and a huge number of fortune seekers lured by contracts and the new status of hero. And in 2025, Pokrovsk could become an important and decisive battle, much like the Chechen village of Komsomolskoye once was. Well,
while the bunker-dwelling Kremlin officials are busy saving their own schools, Russia is literally sinking. An industrial collapse has hit the Russian Federation. 80% of Russia's industries are in decline. The central bank is sounding the alarm. The country is facing its worst crisis since the 1990s.
Resources are on the verge of being depleted. Claims about the stability of the Russian economy do not stand up to the facts.
There is really no other way to describe it, honestly. But this is not our choice. We do not want things to develop this way.
Putin is trying to bluff and save face by creating an illusion of success. But it's all in vain. Russia's economy is rapidly going downhill. Almost 80% of the country's industry has fallen into recession.
When we talk about individual sectors, it means that production in these sectors, compared to the same period, usually the previous year, is getting worse. In other words, things are not improving, they're getting worse. And recession is precisely that worsening when you're in the negative. And when a recession becomes prolonged, when it lasts not just 1 year, but say 3 or 4 years and the decline continues, then it's no longer a recession, it's a depression.
By the end of September, overall industrial production growth in Russia had slowed to 0.3% year-on-year. That's almost 19 times less than last year.
There aren't enough people, and there aren't even enough basic resources to pay for the delivery of components, for the purchase of necessary goods you need for processing. So as a result, you end up producing less. And when you produce less, there you have it. A recession, a negative compared to the previous period.
The sharpest decline is seen in those civilian industries that were supposed to replace the products of foreign companies that left Russia after the start of the full-scale war.
A collapse of import substitution when the plan was, let's replace everything. But in order to replace everything, you have to produce what you'll use as a substitute. And if you don't produce what you're supposed to substitute with, then how are you going to do this substitution with imported products when you're not making anything yourself? So, of course, this is any economic downturn. It means that goods are not being produced. And if they're not being produced, then there's no point in keeping the people who make them. And that leads to unemployment. Unemployment is always an unpleasant story.
In fact, the domestic market is deprived of consumer goods, and Russian factories are unable to make up for the shortage.
Even now, it would seem the military sector, part of the military sector, namely the production of weapons and ammunition, is affected. In September of this year, compared to September of last year, Russia is down 1.3%. So even the production of weapons and ammunition is already in decline. What can we say about other sectors of the economy which are showing even worse results?
The central bank has predicted that Russia could face its worst economic downturn since the 1990s if sanctions are tightened. If the situation does not improve, by 2026 the Kremlin could lose $108 billion in export revenues.
Here, the problems are, let's say, still gaining momentum, but the first sign we see of their implementation is that taxes in Russia have been rising since the beginning of the year. The utilization fee will be introduced on December 1st. The environmental tax is set to increase almost tenfold starting November 1st, literally in a week or even just a couple of days. So it turns out that all these various economic problems are cropping up more and more often, and they keep appearing in the news because, it's Zugzwang, when you don't have any good options.
Russian Sberbank, following Gazprom, has begun mass layoffs. In the first quarter, the staff of the largest bank, which holds half of all individual deposits, decreased by 8,600 employees, in the second quarter by 3,500, and in the third by 1,500.
At Sberbank of Russia, when they see, here's a direct quote from Sberbank CEO Herman Gref, throughout 2025, there is not a single new investment project that Sberbank is working on. So the people responsible for this area simply have nothing to do. And since they have nothing to do, meaning there's no reason to pay them a salary, they are being laid off. That's why laying people off is a demonstration that there is no demand for the economic functions that Sberbank provides. And accordingly, these people are cut. But this is just one of many examples.
That's the reality. Only Putin is trying to hide it all. But there's nowhere left to go. The economy is cracking. The country is losing money. Moreover, by the end of 2025, Russia could be dependent on fuel imports for 60%. 57 regions are affected by the fuel crisis. Refineries are burning after strikes by Ukrainian drones, and Moscow is preparing for new chaos. The fuel crisis in Russia has even reached oil-rich Tyumen.
Human, did you see this? I pull up to a gas station today, hand over 3,000 rubles and say, please fill up my tank for 3,000 rubles, 95 octane gasoline. And they tell me, that's all you get because you can only fill up 30 liters.
Gasoline is running out in more than half of Russia's regions.
The daily madhouse at the Rosneft gas station continues. There's no gas anywhere except at Rosneft. It's kind of funny that now you have to stand in line for a bit.
But as always, the authorities say the situation is under control. There's only a slight price increase.
We understand the situation. Prices have gone up. The most important thing is that gasoline is available at the gas stations.
Well, you could say that maybe it's available somewhere, but people are saying otherwise.
Guys, there's practically no gasoline at any of the gas stations. Here's the right lane. What you see here is all aligned for the gas station where there's still a chance that there's some gasoline left. Most likely there is, maybe some premium or 95 octane. And I started filming somewhere in the middle of this sausage line to show you what's going on. There's no gasoline at the gas stations. Give us some gas, guys.
Russia will become dependent on fuel imports.
So, in this country, there might not even be gasoline at the gas stations.
Oil companies will not be able to resume their oil refining operations at previous volumes until June. Abia besar menurut total pemal na kontinent.
This is necessary not only for the normal functioning of its oil refining sector, but for the entire economy as a whole.
Russian oil refineries remain technologically backward and outdated in terms of production structure. When some plants stopped operating, the country effectively lost a significant portion of its domestic capacity.
Replacing certain components with less advanced ones often results in a decline in overall quality. In Russia, even 2 years ago, there was already talk about wanting to change automobile standards, essentially reverting them to the standards of the 1970s. And now, due to these strikes and the inability to fully restore everything, there is talk of lowering fuel production requirements.
Accordingly, lowering fuel production standards will lead to cars breaking down.
Russian refineries will be producing gasoline of significantly worse quality. This gasoline will end up in the engines of Russian cars, which may not even be able to run on it because their engines are used to a certain quality level. And now this standard is being lowered in Russia. This will clog engines and lead to a huge number of car breakdowns. So this is the reality that is now unfolding in Russia. And again, this is yet another confirmation that when you are technologically backward, and Russia is indeed technologically backward, you probably shouldn't be waging war against the world.
In September, the gasoline shortage in the domestic market reached 20% of consumption. Due to supply shortages, wholesale gasoline prices have jumped by 40 to 50% since the beginning of the year.
It's obvious that Russia is already lacking capacity. Yes, there is still some capacity left, but not all of our drones, so to speak, have reached their targets yet. So this isn't some distant prospect. This is the outlook for early 2026, when Russia will be hugely dependent on external fuel suppliers. I repeat, in a country that's basically a gas station.
In order to at least somehow put out the fire on the fuel market, the authorities imposed a complete ban on gasoline exports from Russia, relaxed environmental requirements for refineries, quadrupled fuel purchases from Belarus, and also eliminated import duties to start supplies from China.
In September, compared to August 2025, Belarus increased its fuel supplies fourfold. So they were supplying a little before, but now we understand that Belarus plays a huge role. Because Belarus, yes, even though it's the most modern in terms of the former USSR, with actively developed enterprises in Mosul and Novopolotsk, still, their capacities are not enough to cover Russia's needs. And then there's China, but neither Belarus nor China will supply, let's say, at the prices that Russia wants.
Russia could even end up depending on imported fuel for up to 60% of its needs by the end of the year.
In addition to Belarus and China, fuel supplies to Russia will also come from Azerbaijan. And just like with Belarus and China, Azerbaijan won't do it for cheap either. The price will be set seeing how Russia now depends on Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan will, of course, try to take advantage of this situation. So there will be certain higher prices here, but Russia has no other option. In other words, Russia is now truly becoming more and more dependent on external suppliers.
Since the beginning of August, UAVs have struck dozens of major oil refineries in Russia, leading to the deepest fuel crisis in the country's history. And the further it goes, the worse the situation becomes.
What do you think about the situation in Moscow? We look forward to your comments. There's more to come.